Hello, everybody. Today we have Dr. Randal Jelks, author of Letters to Martin and a professor at University of Kansas, an entrepreneur,
I
commun-
guess.
community activist,
Yes, all of the above.
yeah, scholar,
Yeah.
author, and Grand Rapidian by way of Louisiana.
By the way of Louisiana and Chicago.
And Chicago,
Yeah.
New Orleans, yeah.
New Orleans to Chicago. So I always tell people I took the Louis Armstrong Mahalia Jackson route. Louis Armstrong initially came to Chicago to play with King Oliver. Mahalia Jackson recorded all of her gospel music in Chicago and so forth.
Oh, yeah. Chicago's got a great history. There's a group of folks that come up every week on Monday for open mic night. Still, like a jazz group, right around the corner. Yeah. What are we'll start off maybe with music then. Are you a musician yourself? I've never asked you.
No, I learned music as a youngster in New Orleans. I think that just comes with the
Brass.
the trumpet. It comes with the territory.
Yeah.
Music's very serious. When I was growing up, it was a serious endeavor. That's why so many great musicians still come out.
I feel like it's the kind of place where you'd wake up in the morning and you'd hear trumpets and
you hear in my era you heard jukeboxes.
Oh, jukeboxes, really?
Yeah, right. I mean, people. New Orleans is a city full of neighborhood. The Irish and the English would call them pubs. But bar rooms.
Yeah.
And neighborhoods have all selected one. So going to school, I would hear whatever was on the jukebox or what was playing, and listen to all kinds of music. And because I belong to my mother and I belonged to a Lutheran church, we heard Bach. So I heard from classical music to bebop to old kind of Dixieland style jazz. So all of the above.
A lot of live performances too,
always on the street.
Yeah.
I mean, you just heard music everywhere, and that was the beauty of growing up. Different than growing up in Chicago, moving to Chicago for high school. It was a different vibe and feel. But at my high school, there was a serious choir or very serious music program. One of my high school classmates, great jazz musician, Steve Coleman, a MacArthur winner, Genius Award winner. He and I were in the same graduating class, and so music was there too. It was just different. I mean, because you access music in New Orleans by just simply walking down the street. In Chicago, was a little more formalized.
It seems like all of New Orleans is musical.
Right. But Chicago was, too, because of the inflection of the blues. You had, great Muddy Waters or McKinley Morganfield, Howlin' Wolf, all of those, Coco Taylor. And when in my era, of course, you had the Yvette Stevens, who became Shaka Khan.
Oh, okay.
And groups like the Emotions, all of them in the Shy Lights, all of them were on the south side of Chicago. So both cities were musical. I mean, quite musical, but just different. I mean, and one you have warm weather, where you access people all the time and you hear live performance because you can just walk down the street. Chicago, you just wintertime kills everything.
Oh man,
Yeah,
freezes it right up.
oh, it freezes all up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got off the subway one time in Chicago. It was the wintertime. I had just gotten back from I think San Francisco or something like that, and I had taken the L from I think it was Midway to downtown.
Yeah.
And I found the closest um, exit point to the hotel I was staying at, and it was only 2 blocks away. And I stepped off of that platform, and it was so cold I couldn't even think. I was looking at it was back before a GPS, so I had a map, and I was looking at the map, and I was looking at the street signs, and I was trying to move the map to coordinate with the street signs, and I was so cold. I had to call a taxi to come and pick me up. There was one just right there,
Right.
so I just kind of waved him down. I was like, "Hey, I'm trying to get to the Radisson or something like that." He's like, "Okay, I'll take you there." And he literally drives around the block, and the fare didn't even go up. It was still that base.
Oh yeah,
It was
Chicago.
so cold.
The mighty Almighty Hawk, we call it.
Man.
Mr. Wind. The wind, downtown creates a wind tunnel with all the tall buildings, and man, yeah, I feel you. I feel you. My first winter in Chicago was as a freshman in high school, and I wrote my grandmother, I don't know what we were thinking moving here.
How old were you when you moved from?
I was a freshman in high school.
Freshman in high school. Okay.
14.
So that's kind of like a pivotal time to
Yeah.
go from middle school to high school and then change states. And
Yeah, it was. But it was, in retrospect, it was an easier time because, you graduate from 8th grade. And,
yeah.
in those days, junior high was called, and moved on to high school. It was a good time.
Yeah.
It was really good for me personally. Just got to go to high school with lots of very gifted young people, and I'm forever grateful.
Oh, was was Chicago more academic then?
Yeah. Well, the school fit me better in my temperament at the time. It was a lot of high achieving students, and it worked for me. I mean, New Orleans would have worked for me too. I probably would have gone to a Catholic boys' school there,
Oh,
Saint Augustine. It's a historically black Catholic boys' school, but Chicago was great because it gave me a different level of exposure to what was going on. One of my uncles, who one of the dedications of the book was involved with Dr. King and his Chicago movement and housing and so forth. So I got exposed to.
What was his nickname?
Huh?
The gentleman you're talking about in the dedication?
Yeah, my uncle Jess.
Jess.
Yeah,
Yeah, I read
yeah,
the first man, right? Wasn't he
Yeah.
in the dedication?
Well,
doesn't
that
it
was
say?
my other uncle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
That's
my
right.
parents divorced very early, and my uncles really played the surrogate fathers.
Yeah.
Both of them, one in New Orleans, one in Chicago.
I see.
And so they were really very different. My uncle in New Orleans was a World War II vet and became disabled because of polio.
Oh.
And so, I mentioned him because he lived with us, and so every day I saw this man, have to put on heavy braces then, and
Iron legs.
yeah, the braces,
Yeah.
and go to work, and this is before the Americans with Disabilities Act, and go to work every day and do things that taught me determination.
Yeah.
And he never allowed for much excuse making. He went to work, and those were the days when accessibility was very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw, then my other uncle in Chicago was lucky enough to go to university, and he brought something else to my life, and brought to me, and it would take me around meeting the kind of Chicago politicos and other stuff. And as a kid, I became very interested in what was going on around me, because I lived in New Orleans. I lived in working class to working poor neighborhood, and I say working class to working poor because people often don't think poor people work.
They work hard
and every day, and at very low wages. And as a kid, I became conscious of that people worked around me every day, and they worked very hard. And it was very hard for them to accumulate enough resources.
And everything's more expensive when you're poor.
That's
right.
Right.
It's a good.
But New Orleans has a joyous side to it. So people had family, they had friends, they drank too much, all of those wonderful things. Moving to Chicago, we moved into a middle class neighborhood, like I said, and people like Michelle Obama grew up in my neighborhood.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, I mean,
what district in New Orleans?
In New Orleans, I lived in what's called the Central Business District, CBD, and CBDC.
Do they call them boroughs or districts?
Well, there's neighborhoods.
Just neighborhood.
I could give you the French, what the part of that plantation that it was. New Orleans was all sectioned off from plantations.
Oh yeah,
so
French plantations, right?
That's right. The neighborhoods are all, all different. So, and I live. What was very great about New Orleans, I lived 2 blocks off of St. Charles Avenue, the very, famous where the streetcar runs down St. Charles Avenue.
Yeah.
So I grew up 2 blocks off of St. Charles Avenue.
Parading.
Parading. Yeah. I mean,
occasionally.
And just the visual. I mean, it's a weird thing if you're in a working poor neighborhood, but you live where there are literally mansions.
Yeah.
Right. So, till I was able to travel out of the United States, New Orleans. I went to Brazil, Rio. I said, okay, Rio is much like New Orleans. And you've got working poor and the rich because like my grandparents were domestic, so they worked for well-off people. My grandmother was a maid, and so forth. Moving to Chicago was a different experience. One, Chicago then had 1 million black people.
1 million, literally.
1 million, literally.
Yeah.
And it was now it's shrunk. Lots of people out migration out of the city, but it was.
Was there a concentration in the South Sides?
Yep. The South Side was the first initial neighborhood, and then the West Side of Chicago.
Yeah.
So Chicago was different, and the class politics. New Orleans and Chicago have their own, internally to black communities, their own class politics, and so it was just a different space and place.
And you've got a great chapter about labor in your book, the second to the last chapter.
Right. Yeah.
About, I think that talking about that, maybe that the differences.
Well, but the labor was the same. People are going to work every day, whether. In the United States, we all think we want to be the owners of Walmart or Myers or whatever the large corporation is, but we don't think about the people who are quote unquote the essential workers.
Mm-hmm.
And as a kid, like I said, I saw people who go to work every day and not able to accumulate, not able to have equity in the society, so to speak. And that was very important for me. That formed my consciousness. So while I was very, very fortunate, fortunate from the beginning, I get to graduate from high school, go to the University of Illinois, my first year of college. Absolutely hated the place.
What do you mean? Just
but still was the flagship state university, and that it's a Big Ten university.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't fit me. Eventually made my way by meeting a girlfriend
Okay.
to the University of Michigan.
Okay.
And that fit me because Michigan had, at that time, so lots of out-of-state students. And it felt like, they had the concentrations of Detroit suburbs and Detroit itself, but it felt much more cosmopolitan than Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Illinois was essentially, you had Chicago in the Chicago suburbs, and then you had the smatterings of people around the state at Illinois.
Yeah, Illinois is very.
It's in the central Illinois, Champaign.
Yeah.
And you had, very much Champaign was town and gown. And there was a sizable black community in Champaign, Illinois, but that had nothing to do with the university.
What's town and gown mean?
Huh?
What's town and gown mean?
Town means the gowns are the people who are at the university. When you wear your cap and gown at the end of
caps and gowns. Yeah,
right.
Okay.
So it was a lot of town and gown issues. Ann Arbor, too, but different. Again, Ann Arbor felt a little more urban, a lot more hipper.
Yeah.
In many ways than Illinois.
Did Ann Arbor always have a really good food scene? I've always
it had a lot of good restaurants. As a student, I couldn't afford to go.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and the rents were always high in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
exceedingly high because again, you had a whole contingent of people from Jersey and New York coming to the university.
It's a very intellectual town.
That fit me.
Yeah.
That fit
like
me.
to think.
Right. Well, supposedly.
Yeah.
but I mean, there were all kinds of.
Did you get involved on campus then pretty heavily? Or?
Yeah, I mostly doing my own work. Not as much. I went back to Chicago after graduating, and that's where I got really involved.
Mm-hmm.
And
politically, you mean? Or
yeah,
academic?
politically.
Okay.
Politically, I went back as a theological student to on the campus of the University of Chicago and took classes at the University of Chicago Divinity School.
Okay.
And
the university?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the place called McCormick Theological Seminary. There were like 12 seminaries that sit on the campus of the University. So essentially, if you're an undergraduate at University of Chicago, you're surrounded by people who are in grad school.
Okay.
It makes it miserable. Whereas, Ann Arbor, Illinois, Northwestern, you've got a large undergraduate population. But at Chicago, you're surrounded by people who are all doing, heavy-duty graduate work. And it's a miserable place. I mean, because you can't, being a goofball is not something you want to spend time at as a graduate student.
Yeah.
I mean, be undergraduate, you're a goofball, but you can't be totally goofy and as a graduate student. And people are doing it for professional reasons, ambitions, all of that.
Credentials.
Right. And Chicago was a
sharp town.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I lived in a neighborhood just southeast of Hyde Park, that's where I went to high school. I lived in Hyde Park, and it was it was pretty intellectual. People reading books all the time,
it's a snappy town.
Yeah, it was interesting. That Hyde Park was interesting because I would hang out at a place called the Woodlawn Tap Jimmy's, as we refer to it. And it was so interesting because you could have a Nobel Prize winning economist, a plumber, and Jimmy's Woodlawn Tap, and a novelist all watching the White Sox. Because it's the South Side. You can't watch the Cubs, so forth,
I didn't know that they were geographically.
Yeah, the White Sox are the South Side, man. The Cubs are the North Side. Now the Cubs used to be in a working class neighborhood, and now it's upscale, so nobody really respects the Cubs because they don't have that heart.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, yeah, because my mom's mom was always a Cubs fan.
Yeah.
But I saw her
and of course, in my day, if you grew up with the National League, you were a National League, and you didn't cross over to be. It was very conflicting to me because I grew up National League with St. Louis as the closest team to New Orleans or the Dodgers. And the Dodgers was, I was always wondering why we were a Dodgers fan. and that was Jackie Robinson, right? The Dodgers, we followed the Dodgers because that was the first team to integrate, and it was Jackie Robinson. And then in the 60s, we rooted for St. Louis. Of course, we had to play Detroit, Tigers. And, it was, Bob Gibson and Lou Brock and, a whole host of people. We were real St. Louis fans. Then I come to Chicago, and I'm got to decide whether I'm a Cub fan or a White Sox fan. I just stayed kind of neutral and rooted for both. And went to both, games because the Cubs, when I was in high school, never played at night. They were always day games. So, you could, the bleachers weren't for the rich as they are now. The bleachers were for kids, lots of kids, $2 or $3, man. You sat out in the bleachers and caught a game. And now they got, sushi bar and all of this
whole different deal.
In the White Sox, it was always fun because the old Kaminsky Park, had these places you could sit and watch the game. Like a pole would be in the middle. Your friend would watch on this side. You would watch on that side. Yeah, And this is the era when Bill Veeck had the shorts and the all kinds of things, and the great Dick Allen played for the White Sox, and we would go see them. So it was great. I mean, and it was accessible to the general public.
Yeah, I wonder what it is about society that it seems like as time goes on that things become less and less soulful and accessible.
Well, part of what part of what you asked me about labor is, what my concern is for the country is that the disparity and the inequity is growing, and and so my thought is having lived experience, not just academic knowledge, not this theorizing, having lived experience, seeing a variety of social situations, and I wanted to really address in a way that was accessible to people to discuss the issues that are surrounding us.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything that you can point to that maybe one or two or three things that you think would be strong levers to change? Because I guess for those that don't know, there's the second to last chapter essentially speaks about how traditionally, the black communities paid much less, and it's almost justified through antiquated view of Christianity in some ways.
Sure. Also, look, the history of the United States, there is no United States without the institution of slavery.
Yeah.
And slavery has been in human society, unfortunately, from time immemorial. But mass-scale slavery was what made the difference in the Americas. It's not as my good acquaintance Howard French has written a new book about Africa, Born in Blackness, that slavery in the modern world, throughout the Americas, not just the United States, from Argentina on up, became the way to control labor was to racialize it, right? Because what do you do with people, get together and cavort? They're gonna have children, so you have to racialize slavery. And slavery is, as I teach my students, is all about labor.
Mm-hmm.
You want free labor. right? Like as we think of in Michigan today, we think about Central Americans and one-time Mexicans, but it's more Central Americans, working, picking cherries and other stuff. So in some ways, those are the people who pick cherries and other stuff. And one group becomes this identified with quote unquote debased labor, that. But essentially, enslaved people were agricultural workers, plantations, all the major things we like, right? We have cotton on. We
Tobacco at the time.
Tobacco, sugar was the initial draw. Rice in the Carolinas and Georgia Sea Islands. So these
sugar cane too.
Yeah,
that's hard to work with.
Well, yeah, in Louisiana, where I'm from, of course, some of my forebears were sugarcane cutters. So these were all the kinds of ways that people don't think about. They think about race, but they don't think about why race is a construct in the United States as a way of controlling labor. And what happens is, if you organize labor as in the colonial era, early colonial era, you want to separate people by work. Right?
Yeah, I read something about how in World War II the Nazis studied our Constitution because we were the first ones to put racial language in it.
Right.
And it's the United States essentially invented the term.
Yeah, not just the United States. I mean, I think we give ourselves too much credit there.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, look, the Spanish and the Portuguese were vying for competition in the, what would become South America first, and the Caribbean, and then later the English, and so that competition, the international. The Norwegians, I always remind people from Norway, y'all were about the slave trade. They, oh no, we're all, Scandinavian liberal. No. There's a long history here. The Dutch, they were all in competition for this new labor and to bring people to the Americas. And what you need is when the forest is some people to fell the forest and then plant and so forth. Mm-hmm. Questions is, why the convenience of the Portuguese stumble on slaves. They don't. It's not and they have to make deals with monarchs on the African continent. And it worked for a while for those monarchs to sell people, quote unquote, who were their enemies into slavery, but then it became so damaging to the continent itself that it had a kind of destructive element on the African continent. But Europeans didn't colonize Africa till the 1880s, really fully in any full way, and that's because of the Maxim gun, right? Spears worked just as good as guns. Spears and machetes kept Europeans at bay for a long time. Then the Maxim gun, then it's like what we see. The horrible shootings are going. Automatic weaponry, you could mow down a lot more people.
Yeah, yeah. I think the Louisiana Purchase was in 1850. I think.
No, it's 1803.
1803.
Yeah.
Oh, but they didn't get to the West Coast until 1850 or something.
Right. Well, but I always tell people in Kansas, without the Louisiana Purchase, you don't exist. Right.
Yeah, that was a huge
swath of land.
Yeah.
But the reason Napoleon was willing to put up the Louisiana territories was because he was fighting, the first a mass revolt in Haiti.
Yeah.
And over slavery again, because slavery, people forget, brought in so much more money. And Haiti was for France brought in so much money from sugarcane and the byproduct of sugar. And on the other side, the Spanish used the Dominican Republic, they share the same island, as for sugar.
Mass
And
enslaved.
the Haitian revolutions, the Haitian army under Toussaint marches over the mountains and liberates slaves on the Dominican side. So now, Haiti's in war with both Spain and France, and nobody wanted to see the world economy turned upside down. So there was just the other day in the New York Times, a piece about, Haiti still had to repay France, making it one of the more poor countries in the world.
Until just recently, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Like in the last 10 years or something,
Yeah.
It's incredible to it's such what do you call it? What is it? Like a disconnect, in the sense of on the one hand, it feels like this era of humanity was a long time ago, but we're still in it.
But the consequences of what we do.
That's a good way to put it. They're today, right now.
And we are left
Very
sort
evident.
of left holding the bag, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever we do to, where we're sitting in Michigan, I mean, of course, we forget that all of the hardwood forests that we took down from this area to make furniture.
And the Chicago fire.
Yeah, the Chicago fire. So it's a incredible ecological shift and change. So we always have consequences.
Do you have a strong opinion on reparations and where any?
Well, I mean,
like a strategy.
Of course, that would be in the ideal world. That would be something fair. What I would love to see is most people get a base income. I know I sound socialist, but and for the sake of it, because I think the shift in world labor is to automation. So we're going to see a lot less people having any physical, maleness. Being a man was defined by your brawn at one time, and that no longer is the case.
You're going to be, yeah.
Why? I mean, I just saw your wonderful tractor out there.
What do you need that for?
You don't need, you don't need 20 people to dig up and fell and cut down trees anymore. But high-powered, more, cut down, saws, cut down branches. So these are the kinds of issues, that concern me, and the way I could talk about them literarily and was to write these letters to Martin. And this is the way I could talk about these big, giant issues in a way that I thought was accessible to people by writing letters and so forth.
So there's, in my mind, and again, I think about these sort of things, but I don't know that I'm well versed in them. To me, it seems like there's two options in the sense of catching up, or making today more fair, kind of, so to speak. Is that?
Well, we would hope so, but the whole idea of the United States is that only a select group of people got to be considered worthy, right? Worthy to be citizens. So at the founding of the Republic, only men with property had a say-so in how they were to be governed. Remember, it's not till the 1830s that white men get suffrage. I make my students think about the initial Constitution in the initial census. Who's listed? And then there are check marks for everybody else, right? And so if you were not a property owner, you had no say-so in the right to govern yourself. You had no say-so in who you would vote for.
That's a bit of history I forgot about.
Yeah, so by 1830s, Andrew Jackson, Trump's role model, and I mean that literally.
Sure.
The Indian Removal Act, so you push natives out of the regions to give properties to Europeans and to appeal to disgruntled class of people, and you use being white as the measuring stick for voting, so white men get to vote. It's not until the 1868 that after the American Civil War that eradicates the institution of slavery, that black men get the right to vote in theory and use that right to vote until about the 1890s in a struggle, but still people voted, and then Jim Crow laws to eliminate the black vote. I mean, that's what Jim Crow is all about.
Redlining and
well, no, before even redlining, throughout the South where most black people live, it was about eliminating voting. So
just straight up, just
right,
not even gonna game it, just no.
Right. So this is why Dr. King gives his first speech before the Lincoln Memorial. People remember "I Have a Dream," but his first speech before the Lincoln Memorial is 1957 in honor of Brown v. Board of Education, and his speech is "Give us the ballot." I mean, it's already recognizes that the ballot is taken away from people, which states around the country are doing today. Now, Jim Crow laws are happening at a rate. It's not just a racialized now; it is happening to all people, and making more difficult for people to exercise the right to vote, so that a small oligarchy can run the country.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important for us, all of us, to know that history is, because it determines a lot. I mean, and in terms of a lot, those acts from the Civil War, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution really set the stage for the debates we're having, whether it's about reproductive rights, whether it's about same-sex marriage, and so forth, and of course access to the ballot. These are all before us, right as we speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not ancient history. It's today, right now.
Right, in one of the ways, my way of doing this was to say, okay, I want people. I could write, and I have colleagues who've written big tomes about the vote and the history of voting and so forth, and our fellow academicians will read it, but the general public won't.
Yeah, and your approach is much more conversational.
Yeah.
And I would say also segmented by common sense topics, I think maybe is a fair way to put it.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to put it in accessible ways, in accessible ways to have that conversation with people. Like I said, these things are autobiographical. Being born in the South, being born in New Orleans, being born in the state of Louisiana, my imagination was struck early on, and I was trying to figure out how to speak about these things that I think still are current events.
Do you have a specific chapter that was more difficult to write than another, just more emotionally charged than another?
No, I actually don't think so. I mean, of course, as an author, you always like, well, I would have did that chapter differently.
Yeah, a year later.
Right. But I thought, no, I actually was, I liked what I tried to do. I think the hardest chapter for me was the one about love, to how to engage people without, in essence, dehumanizing. We're not always going to be friends. We're going to be opposite of the fence, and we're going to have strong views, but not to miss somebody else's humanity. That's a really important thing because it's when we can dehumanize people that we do things to others that we wouldn't want to have done to us. Or we forget that they're human. Like we forget people are in prison, and so incessantly,
out of sight, out
of mind.
Yeah.
And so prisons can become hellholes and make people worse because we forgot that they're there.
Yeah.
And once we dehumanize people, once we forget that they are human, like atrocities all over the world occur because once you make people the total other, then you can do anything you want to them.
Or scapegoats of society.
Correct.
It's just
and so as an African American, I know that's part of the function of being African American in the United States. It's the same problems all over. Last week I was in Montcalm County, one of the poorest counties the poorest county in the state.
Is it Montcalm?
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
I didn't know that.
And
Michigan.
Right. It's Michigan. It's the poorest county in the state. See, even poorer than, people always lambast Benton Harbor. It's even poorer in Benton Harbor, right? Because that's urban.
Yeah.
Right? Urban poverty. But you drive out Montcalm County, there's a lot of poor people. But they're out of sight, right? Out of mind. But they got the same relationship to Benton Harbor, so to speak, that because they're people who are out of work, won't get work, and how do we bring those people together and to see each other's humanity and say, we need to organize those people to have their own voice to speak for themselves about issues that bother. Look, I'm a privileged person. I'm a university professor. I'm like in the NBA. I'm a full tenure professor.
Yeah.
That's a
big deal.
It's a big deal, right?
Big deal.
In a major university. So, but I can't speak for folks living in Benton Harbor or Montcalm County. But I can say that they can speak for themselves and have to organize themselves and not racialize one another as best they can to organize.
Not racialize one another to organize?
Yes.
Can you unpack that a little bit? I don't.
Well, so no matter where I'm traveling in the United States, people see the color of my skin.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
They don't know what I do. If I say, I've been on flights to Europe and, sitting in business class, and people say, oh, you teach at a university, you must be a music teacher, right? That's the right? I said, no, so because that I fit in that place, you see, because they don't think of somebody being black as any other kind of, I have friends who are scientists who are like, we get this all the time. And you say, well, no, I teach chemistry.
Yeah.
I mean, because in their mind, either I'm an athlete or I'm a musician, and because that's the only reason I would be traveling in business class, because obviously I must be some kind of musician, right? So what I mean is that you have an image, you categorize people in a certain area. So
confirmation bias.
Yeah, that's
I think
right.
what it's
called. So you just categorize people initially about seeing them. Like I've learned living in Kansas, people don't dress well in Kansas, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, probably right.
But I've learned, like that guy who looks rather bummy to me is very well off, right? I'm not, once you find, well, like he owns this or that business.
He's got 300 head of cattle.
Yeah, right. Or, owns, there's still oil in Kansas. And people, you can't, you have to first listen to their story before you can suddenly just put a label on them. And, all of us do this. Everybody does. But on the mass scale, we've all been trained to look at people first by how the complexion of their skin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I mean by not racializing people, because that inhibits addressing issues. So if the issue is housing, right, and you say there are worthy white people and there are non-worthy black people, you can't organize about housing, really, because that's going to, what a good politician is going to do, see, those black people over there trying to get housing that you're not getting. And really, you need housing too, right? I mean, so people in Montcalm County in those trailers need some better housing. I mean, just in Gaylord the other day, little tornado.
Yeah, a little tornado, yeah.
Right, and hit a trailer park.
Uh-oh.
Right? So they both need housing. Affordable housing that people can build equity with, because that's how we get income in the United States.
Yeah.
But if you racialize it, you can't talk about the issue of housing in any psychologically rational way, because you can't say, yeah, look, this is what maybe working in Benton Harbor. I don't know if it will work in Montcalm County, but perhaps we should be talking to one another.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I'm getting some clarity on it. So I guess a little bit of what threw me off a little bit is that it sounded like what you were saying is black folks or organizing shouldn't racialize it. But no, what it sounds like you're saying is anybody that's working on organizing it shouldn't racialize it.
But that's what politicians do, and you want to win, you effectively create division. So
right, yeah. So by design, what a probably Republican would want, or a righty, right. However you want to call it, would want.
Well, in the old South, this old South, it was Democrats in the South.
Yeah, that's flipped through the years.
Right, they flipped, but it was Democrats through the South, and of course they split the world by race, right?
I see what you're saying.
People were poor all over the place.
Yeah.
White, black, everybody, because they've got an unequal system.
But if you can racialize it, you can point to somebody to try and push down and make yourself...
Right. Well, you push down. The great historian, sociologist named W.E.B. Du Bois said, in a book called Black Reconstruction, he says, in the South, the white Southerners were paid in the wages of whiteness. He plays on the Bible. The wages of sin is death. So the wages of whiteness is paid, and so it makes you psychologically feel better. There's somebody below me, but it doesn't solve your problem.
Yeah,
right. It doesn't solve your problem that you're still going to be poor. You're still going to be on the outs, and there are other people. But it gives you a psychological peace of mind that you're still better than somebody else.
It's such an interesting dynamic that humans crave that. So
status.
But even I know plenty of people that have undoubtedly achieved a status of pretty high up there and are still comparing themselves to others. That's what I'm saying. It's such
it happens in my business all the time. I mean, it's like, I'm at Kansas, I should be at Harvard.
Yeah, it's like exactly. You're not one. Yeah. One is already at the top 1%, but humans just never seem. It's never enough for humans. Right. It's never enough.
And this is why the rules, where I think the framers of the Constitution, in the 18th century, did understand human behavior, in the sense that why you don't want to ever give any one side of government too much power.
You know what I think is often forgotten, or at least I need to be reminded quite a bit, is that the framers were quite young.
Yeah, but they had a historical sense.
They did,
which most Americans are averse to history, probably because the way it's been taught. But they have very little historical sense. So everything is then made innocent. Well, we're all innocent, but we're a part of a system that were created. We had nothing to do with.
Yeah.
Right? You know, I was born in 1956. I didn't ask to be born in 1956. Yeah. Nor did I ask to be born, looking at my birth certificate, from the state of Louisiana, a Negro boy. That's what they have on my birth certificate, right? I mean, not that I was just somebody's child. Their race is identified.
They got a box for that.
Got a box for that. I'm already in the category. That wasn't my dealing or my parents' dealing, apparently. But the laws of the land put those categories in there. When you say to people, well, those categories are meaningful and they can cut down your life chances, they get defensive, because what we are fed is that we're all innocent. And what the framers understood, that human behavior is that people glom onto power, or glue onto power, or want to be powerful, and that power can also be equally dangerous if it's concentrated. So
nothing corrupts faster than power.
Absolute power.
Yeah. It was the saying, absolute corruption through absolute power. Some derivative of that.
That's right.
Something like that. One time we were speaking last, and I had asked you some suggestions on getting involved with politics, and I was saying, I had said, state level, this, regional, and you said start locally.
Yeah, well, the local issues, I mean, you have this wonderful ideal setting, but you've got all kinds of ecological issues out.
Oh, I've got a court case pending right now.
Right.
On Tuesday, I'm going to court for some ecological issues.
Right, because that's where it begins. And so if you just went down a little further south and just kept talking about these kinds of issues, Benton Harbor has a lead issue, right?
Emerging, it's a big problem.
Right, but it's all over the United States.
Oh, yeah.
We have a almost 125-year-old sewer system.
We had a lead problem here on this property.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the kinds of ecological issues should be tying people together.
I agree.
These are why I say locally, because they're going to represent what is in the national interest. And you have to get people to come together around their commonality. We don't live on MSNBC or Fox, which is talking about this kind of national. We live at the local level. So organizing requires us to find language and sit frustratingly when people misunderstand us, and to
the old pause and repeat.
Yeah, pause and repeat.
What I hear you saying is
right. That's correct. And then you might do it over and over again, and over like what can work for a benefit. And people on all sides are going to be suspicious of one another. That's the work we have to do.
Do you think suspicion? Do you think that is a divider, a core divider?
Very, very much so. Because
Suspicion.
you're thinking that one group is getting something you ain't getting, right?
Huh.
And people always are.
Is or will?
Well, both.
Or both, either way. Just suspicious of uneven
right. And
fairness.
of course, human behavior is very much, we are very much driven by resentments. I mean, I'm not. I think we want make human beings too innocent again.
Yeah.
Resentments. The resentments come in all form: class politics, jealousy about property. I mean, 2/3 of lynchings in the South were about property issues.
Really?
2/3 of.
I didn't mean to say that, but
No.
it's surprising to learn.
Right, because black landowners had better properties. So you can say, well, that person's having sex with a white woman, and you could lynch them. And then the family, so distraught, is going to leave that land and move north or move somewhere else because of that horrific and traumatizing event.
It only takes one of those type of events to...
Right. But if you really studied the history of
And then the land gets sold cheap.
Correct. And normally it's going to be somebody who has a lot more money.
Yeah.
Who could come away and buy it.
I'd imagine.
Yeah. So resentments all over the place.
Were they just were they farming better, or were they just
sometimes yes.
Having
right. Sometimes people as a family got together, and yes, they farmed better. Or in the case of...
Or you'd have 3 or 4 families come together and get a big plot where white folks
so it all... But but you're not supposed to farm better. You're black.
Huh.
Right? It's not about being a farmer.
Yeah.
It's about you're being black. And that's supposed to be low status. And you're supposed to be, a pretty dumb person. Right? Now, those are all the kinds of issues.
I don't like seeing this success.
Right. That's correct. I mean, and part
and
of the
Black Wall Street in Tulsa.
Right, yeah, right.
Wasn't it Tulsa?
And Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, people had amassed property, which means property meant right to participate, right to vote, right. So resentments drive people to do, again, and this is the world over, not just the United States. You drive people all over the world to do really, it's no more nasty things to each other. It's no more crazy place in a university, right?
Oh?
Because universities are not about the salaries. I mean, I think you could make more money.
Yeah, right.
Right, it being elsewhere. But it's about, is your scholarship recognized? Is it... are you getting public attention that I'm not getting? So resentments are all over the place. And it's just how they feel in
scholarly journal publications.
Right, that's right. Or, invitations to speak this place or that way. So resentments are human behavior.
And you're going to get more resentments with a insecure population.
Right. Right.
Traditionally,
and most people are insecure.
Well, sure. Anybody, you can find an insecurity or two from anybody.
I
had bad acne growing up.
Right,
real bad.
Right, but you were in the tech sector for.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, of course, if whatever your gizmo is, if it takes off, the other people are like,
yeah,
or you're taking clients from me because your app or whatever it is works better for the particular sector of the business. So resentments, and of course there are companies that try to destroy other companies, so that
aggressively,
and they can buy off their property. Well, that's what lynchings were about too.
I had no idea. It makes perfect sense, but. Property for sure.
Yeah, property issues and so forth. Or the prettiest white girl in town becomes infatuated, the young, handsome black farmer.
In shape.
Yeah,
more than likely. Right. I mean, I'm not trying to be like that way,
but of course, in these, you have to keep people separate and you have to keep them down.
Yeah. Is the... I don't know how to exactly ask this, so I'm just going to stumble through it. But the time, the period of time that North American slavery lasted for, 300
years.
300 years. Through those 300 years, it's like the white and the black communities, I feel like, are so intertwined through those 300 years.
Oh, absolutely.
In so many different ways that...
Yeah, absolutely. In the South, there's black and white folks have an intimacy with each other, right? So,
in a good way, you mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay. All right.
Intimacy, both families.
A lot of mixed family.
My last name is Jelks.
Mm-hmm.
They're white Jelks.
Yeah, my best friend's grandpa's he's darker skin, but his grandpa's white as a ghost.
Yeah. So
Plenty of that.
But we have to have divisions, right? I mean,
Yeah.
The divisions about economic. This is part of capitalism. I mean, I hate to say this. I'm not diametrically opposed to capitalism.
It's got some ugly corners.
A lot of ugly corners, and this is why we at least minimally need to. We always are trying to keep the worst of human behavior in check. That's the minimum thing we can do.
Yeah, and agree what the worst side of behavior is. I mean, capitalism
the selling of arms
to kids, essentially.
Well, proportionally, Switzerland and the United States has about proportionally the same amount of guns.
Is that right?
Yeah. Of course, the Swiss, you have to have training for your weapons.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not about the questions of having guns. The other side is that we might take a lead from our own U.S. Armies, Navy, Marines.
Mm-hmm.
The Army takes the guns away from their soldiers at night. I mean, MPs have so.
Yeah.
But if you go on a base, MPs, but they're all locked up.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to a general at Leavenworth, and he said, well, look, you got to know this. I got 18-year-olds running around, right? And if they get in a fight over a girl, what are they going to do?
The bad decisions, probably.
Bad decisions. So the Army takes the guns at night.
Yeah.
So we have, you have people saying, well, I need my guns because we need militias. The Second Amendment to the Constitution,
musket militias is what they were thinking.
Well, they were thinking about militias because we didn't have a standing army. And two, they were thinking in the Deep South because you had rebellions of indigenous nations, right, fighting back not to be moved off their land, and you had slave revolts. Again, we don't think about this in racialized terms, but it very much is the history of the United States. The Second Amendment is to appeal to, so you could muster up, or if the British were coming, and it was real fear that the British would return, 1812, so
they were around here a lot,
right?
It wasn't no big jump,
right? So what all of those things said is that we at least have to explore what actually the language of the Constitution means, what's the history behind it, and so forth. And we don't.
It's I think that I would just venture to guess that most people would find that to be a very intellectual conversation.
Yeah,
they don't want to be troubled with it. Essentially,
yeah, but we don't trouble with it because we got ideologues on the court. Justice Scalia, late Justice Scalia, talking about originalism of the court, and I'm like, no good historian would ever talk about the U.S. Constitution the way the justices talk about the U.S. Constitution. It doesn't make sense historically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was always meant to be a document. That's why we have amendments.
A living document.
Right. That's why we amend it over and repeatedly again. Do
you want to talk at all about kind of the way that the Black Panthers, really kind of exercised their gun rights?
Oh yeah,
and
of course,
and how they met with such extreme resistance.
And the NRA. Well, that's a long history. I wrote a piece, review of a book in for the Boston Review, and it was about the history of arms. This book was about black abolitionists attempting to arm themselves, called Force of Freedom. And, I just wanted to point out that there's always been a long history of that. I wanted to write this in a way that comes up with the questions that I had. So there's letters, and I'm not going to get any return mail on, but with the questions, and to make people think about today's questions. And so my routine was to get up in the morning between sometimes 5, sometimes 7, between 7 and 10, and write. And I had a goal of 125 words, 150 words, a paragraph. And I write every day, and I'm getting back into that routine because I have another book I'm trying to craft.
Awesome.
And so I wanted to be able to write those 150 words, and not edit myself, just keep writing.
Yeah.
And
Content on the page.
That content on the page, because people say, "Oh, I'm going to give all day to writing." It works for some people, but it's just I have to give a time to, and sometimes I would exceed my time. Not that always the writing was good, but I was in the flow.
Yeah, had something to say.
Right.
Yeah.
And so so that daily routine of writing is like anything else. It's an exercise, and you have to, like you go to the gym in early. Some people like going to the gym in the morning. Some people like going to the gym at night, and so writing's like that.
And would it be safe to say that you enjoy the process of writing?
It would be safe. I've been writing for a long time. I started writing in college.
Professionally?
Not professionally, but I was writing. I would write something to the student newspaper. I'd write something in the student newsletter in graduate school. It really wasn't till about 1990 that I started kind of writing professionally.
I see.
And interesting enough, the old Grand Rapids Press, I asked to write book reviews because I thought that would give me an exercise in writing for a public audience and using language that a greater public would understand. So I wrote book reviews in the Grand Rapids Press. I graduated and then wrote several columns in the press. And then, I was pretty engaged politically, so I wrote lots of letters to the editors and op-ed pieces. And then eventually graduated to other papers around the country and so forth. So, I always attribute, my getting the green light from the former editor of the Grand Rapids Press, a guy named Mike Lloyd, who I often disagree with Mike, and Mike disagreed with me, but he was open-minded enough to allow me to first do the book reviews and then, and write op-ed pieces in the paper and so forth.
Did that relationship start off that way, or did it evolve into what it is that you just described?
Oh no, I came to Grand Rapids in 1983 with as a young Presbyterian clergy.
I see.
And trying to figure out what the heck I was in. Grand Rapids was very unusual.
Not New Orleans, not Chicago.
No, that's definitely not either.
No.
And and I'll be very, very honest with you. I was grateful I didn't grow up in Grand Rapids.
Oh, I bet.
Because it has a way of, I grew up with people who are aspirational, and I grew up with people who look like me, who were as talented or more talented than I am. And in a place like Grand Rapids, it's very hard to measure yourself as a person, because you think somehow being black, you're behind solely being black, you're behind the eight ball. Or if you do have success, you never want to come back to a place like Grand Rapids.
Mm.
You know, Al Green will never tell people he's from Grand Rapids.
There's no credibility in that.
No, it's just that it was a miserable experience.
Yeah.
Floyd Mayweather really won't say he's
from Michigan.
He's from Michigan, but he's not from Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
And it says something about a town when you feel that way. Now, I'm very proud to say I'm from New Orleans and I lived in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
That's there's something there, but there's no sense of like, hey, pride. Now, my children want to create that sense of pride about the town that they live their lives in, and try to create things in. But overall, I
think there's success. I think that they're certainly on the upswing of success as far as that goes. Well, single-handedly, almost.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping so. I'm hoping for them.
Yeah.
But so me, I came to Grand Rapids envisioning, trying to figure out who the people I was going to serve.
I see.
So
it's an interesting mindset to have.
Right. So that meant that doing some homework around the community and neighborhoods, and trying to assess the community that I was going to try to be engaged and involved with.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, active ministry. I decided I need to go back to school. I had always wanted to do a PhD. I think because of Martin Luther King Jr., because that was the only person I knew who had a PhD.
Okay.
I didn't have, I personally knew, I later, met people. My associate principal, Dr. Skinner, had an ED, a Doctor of Education. She did. But, and they didn't even understand what that meant. What did it mean to go through this process, this hazing of a sort?
Yeah, yeah. It seems like it.
To get a PhD. So but I wanted to do it because I'm like I have to use this word. I'm an intellectual, and I think about problems. Now, I think about problems from two ways: trying to engage them. And trying to think about the kind of greater ethical issues which is contained in the problem, right? There are ethical issues all over the place, and people don't get pause to think about, and that's what I try to do. So, that all came about part of the writing process. So, I was writing in the Grand Rapids Press and thinking about issues and helping the community, I hope, think about issues, right? And since I was also engaged in the local politics, as I had been in Chicago, so it wasn't my knowledge just from reading books. I had tried to get my hands dirty. I worked for a church that we were trying to figure out the questions of housing, also the questions of jobs. We had a greenhouse built on the church so people in the neighborhood could grow flowers to sell. And
seems very progressive.
Yeah, trying to think about these things, and luckily for me, I got to travel. As a theological student, I went to Eastern Europe, 1980. In Romania and Hungary, studying the Orthodox Church and the Reformed Church under communism.
Oh,
and physically going too as well.
Yeah,
not just like
to
a book
services. You mean?
Yeah, I'm physically being there. I had a professor, Bruce Rigdon is his name, and he was wonderful in that regard. So he was really wonderful in that regard to the so forth. Yeah.
For the traveling.
Yep, and I got to go to the Middle East
Okay.
with him the following year, and so that was really, really, really important for to do, and it reshaped how I thought about the world because I had seen some of the places that um,
The cradle of Christianity. Kind
yeah,
of
cradle of
birthplace.
Christianity, cradle of Islam,
Yeah.
cradle of Judaism, the Abrahamic sides of the religion, but also the kind of contemporary moment of how do you make peace settlements. So, meeting Palestinian families who were getting their land taken away from them.
In Israel, you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, that's right. The kind of incursions
Gaza.
of settlements before that. So that was 1981. So by the time I came to Grand Rapids in '83, I had a vast amount of experience for a young person. I was still young. I was in my 20s, and trying to figure out how do I talk about kind of people who were in the black community, white community, talking about the issues of liberation, and what does that mean? And liberation in terms of women, and gender, because a part of the book talks about those issues. Those all came to me as I traveled, and then by 1987, I got my first trip to Western Africa, and it's thinking about these problems in a global sense of the problems, not just the local. The local reflects the global. And
An extrapolation.
right. And so I I really, really wanted to sort of give back to people what I have been privileged to see and learn, read, study, reflect, talk to real live people all over the place. So I wanted to use whatever privilege that I had in service, and one of the services that I could provide is writing books. So the first book I wrote was about Grand Rapids, called African Americans in the Furniture City: The Struggle for Civil Rights in Grand Rapids. I wrote a history. It wasn't a complete history. It wasn't all history, but it was a start to get people to think about what forms the city that we lived in terms of the issues around. And I really wrote that book from the perspective of African Americans themselves, as opposed to about the problems just of race. I really wanted to say, okay, how might African Americans think about this from the perspective of the people who I had opportunity to read their letters, their papers, and so forth. And
And this is in the 90s?
the book came out in 2005.
Oh, 2005. Okay.
Yeah,
So
right, yeah. So
this century.
it's almost it is indeed. So and the book has been a game changer in the life of the city, because what I was trying to do is I had gone to a school and the kid had talked to me about black people. He said, black people had never done anything in Grand Rapids.
Oh, that's just wrong.
Yeah, and so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna write this book, which wasn't my intent, and so I wrote the book about Grand Rapids.
Sounds like a precursor to City Within a City.
It was the precursor. There would be no city in the city.
Okay, yeah.
Within the city, Todd Robinson's book.
Yeah.
I mean, I blurb it on the back. If you'll look on the back of the book.
Yeah.
I'm not putting myself up. Todd's book is very good
Yeah.
in and of itself.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have a book if I don't do the
Yeah.
book I did. And there's
That's
another
still how
book.
literature can work.
Right. And
sometimes.
then there's another book coming out about. I'm so very proud. Delia Fernandez Jones's book is coming out about Mexicans and Puerto Ricans in Grand Rapids. And so I'm very, very. It comes out next January, and I'm very, very excited. and eager because there are lots of communities in Grand Rapids. The way Grand Rapids explains itself is as just although the Dutch folks were here, but there are lots of communities, and we need to talk about those and how our histories differ.
Mm-hmm.
And the history of women in the city. There is no cultural institutions in the Grand Rapids without upper class white women and their maids.
I bet.
Yeah, so they, Mary Free Bed,
Mm-hmm.
Saint Cecilia's Society, Women Literary Club. All those were important cultural things in the life of the city, and of course, black women who were maids for these women created their own study club. They had their own house, so there are really important things that we need to know about the city and the life of the city. The old history is only told about the rich manufacturers. Right. So there was Baxter. There's all these old history of cities, but they didn't tell you about the men who got their arms cut off at the factory, right?
Yeah, there's very little blue collar angle.
Right, and they didn't tell you about the famous furniture strike where the Dutch laborers walked off the picket line. They didn't tell you about all those things. So that cities contain in themselves. I always tell my students, do something local, do something regional. It will tell you a lot about what's going on nationally.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so forth. And so, that's why I always emphasize that local angle, because it begins all of it begins at that local angle, and you get to see the kind of dimensions of status and hierarchy in your own local community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely glamorize the decision makers at the top when they really don't do anything.
Well, they do.
I mean, not physically.
Yeah, but they do make a difference. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the spokespersons for the civil rights movement, and we ought to be glad he was the spokesperson.
Oh, I mean, like in manufacturing.
Yeah, but even at manufacturing, there are people who will make some good and some bad, a lot more bad choices because, of course, it's driven by
capitalism once again.
Yeah, but a quick exchange of the people who are running the board for quick profits and not long-term profits. And there is a difference. If you can get somebody to lead your company for long-term and steady profits, you might make better decisions. Quick profits, you do like Boeing.
Mm-hmm.
You make an airplane, and then suddenly it's taken down on its own technologically because those jobs are political, right? CEO of a large corporations, leaders make a difference. And if you have a leader who can stave off, sometimes there are boards who have all kinds of harebrained ideas and want quick turnaround on their money. And that's the danger, rather than thinking about what's the long-term benefits to the company and how companies going to stay and how we're going to treat our employees and so forth.
Yeah, anything can be justified through shareholders' value.
Yeah, but and shareholders are just, look, I'm and I don't extract myself from it. I'm beneficiary of mutual funds and other things in my portfolio from University Investing Group, TIAA CREF. I mean, I understand, but leaders do make differences, and oftentimes corporations aren't hiring. University presidents aren't hired because they have a long-term vision for what education in their state or their institution means. So that's the thing you have to deal with. But they do make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And look, George Washington makes a difference. He could have been a military leader and he could have held on to office. It's a major even within his elite group, he could have done that. Leadership does make a difference.
I think it's just
all over the place.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's more that the stories of the middle and the front lines and the middle of the lines are often untold or neglected in some way.
Right, and we tell a negative story about labor unions, right?
Well, that's how we got a weekend.
Yeah, that's how you got a weekend.
Yeah.
And that's how children got out of these dangerous jobs.
Yeah.
But, children around the world, again, my travels, are still working in those dangerous elements.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still a global fight. I mean, we like our cheap cotton that coming from Indonesia. And
Man.
In other places, Vietnam and other places. So we are still have to work to, as I said just earlier to you about prisons, out of sight, out of mind. We don't want to think about where our stuff comes from. And all of the equipment we use, the cobalt that comes from Congo, the middle of Africa, which you can put Western Europe in. So we have to continue to think about those issues. And so Letters to Martin gave me an opportunity, ways to frame that and talk about world issues, global issues, labor issues, policing, and so forth.
Did you how do you say this? When you're discussing the issues, across racial divides, be it what have you, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatnot, do you find that people have a difficult time asking difficult questions?
I think people have more myth in their head than they do reality. And myths are very hard to dispel.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the myths are hard to dispel because they're not actively explored, or just the fact that they're so ingrained?
Oh, so ingrained, and they provide us a comfort level, right?
Mm-hmm.
A comfort
A
level.
social narrative.
Yeah, a narrative about who we are, or at least who we should be, or who we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to think about it. This is why the kind of mass hysteria about critical race theory, right?
Oh yeah.
People don't want to think about themselves caught in structures, and that's what critical race theory says. There are structures we're all involved in, and racial structures are there as there are all kinds of structures, and we are all caught up in these things, and we have to explore those things.
Yeah. So
and sometimes the theorists are wrong. Sometimes they're right, but that's the whole idea of intellectual discussion, right? All of the people who want to eliminate critical race theory is the freedom of discussion is that's the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, to have ideas discussed. That's all Plato and Aristotle were, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of discussion. And Socratic method of questioning and so forth.
How do you think that? Let's keep it local. How do you think folks in Grand Rapids would be able to have? Do you have any suggestions for people in Grand Rapids to have a discussion that isn't likely to have? It would be likely to have opposing opinions. So let me kind of button that up. So, for instance, Abraham Lincoln had the team of rivals. He encouraged discourse or argumentative discourse.
He did.
It seems.
And
it seems like we've lost that.
I would argue that Doris Kearns Goodwin's book Team of Rivals was aspirational. I think the Team of Rivals actually hindered Lincoln from exercising more quickly than
Oh,
he should, because you got a lot of debate about certain things. Um,
it wasn't
and,
single-mindedly.
well, there you have to. Lincoln's a shrewd politician, so he doesn't win by a majority, really. I mean, because the South is sufficiently like, let's get out of here. So he's trying to keep the country intact. So he has these people that uh, uh, um, that are trying to debate issues around him about the fate of the country and the fate of slavery in the United States. Now, the issue of slavery in the United States ought to be made clear. I'm out in Kansas. It was slave labor reduced the cost of labor to all people in the North, because you always got cheaper labor. You got slave labor. And so most, where Illinois, southern Illinois, where Lincoln's coming from, Springfield, most people are arguing about free labor because it reduces the cost of laboring people everywhere. So, all right, so this is why capital moves away from the United States, right? Let's go to Vietnam. Let's move a plant in Vietnam. Why? Because it's cheap labor. So internal to the United States, you know, Southern workers, Southern laborers, farmers can't compete with slave labor. This is a resentment. Again, that's terms of resentment, and so Lincoln's trying to keep the country together over this expansion of slavery, because whether slavery continues to go west from Texas to Kansas to on west, right? Or the state of Oregon, for instance, in parts, the state of Oregon does not permit black people to come into the state because it was in its original constitution, right? So it was determined to be a white state because then it would be better labor conditions for white people, right? That's the history of the state of Oregon. Oregon's one of the whitest states in the union.
Yeah.
But the history of it is that the concept, it's state constitution. Michigan tried to prevent black people from coming into Michigan. I mean, it had a bond that you had to have like $300, and $300.
That's a lot of money back then.
That's right.
Fortune.
So ways of making a competition. And everybody was supposed to be a farmer, and everybody was supposed to grow up to be the gentleman farmer down the road. And you know that didn't work for a lot of people. You might have amassed property after the natives were removed out of Michigan, but the indigenous folks. But you know, most people didn't amass property because who got the best land on the rivers? Well, it was those rich Yankees that came and built, you know, plants. On the river. So you see, these are structures all around us, and this is really important for me to teach people that the structures around it. They get upset because it flies in the face of the myth. 2/3 of all Southerners didn't own a slave.
What?
2/3 of all Southerners did not own a slave. Because you meant you were rich.
Oh, okay.
So to have 20 slaves, you had to have a lot of money.
Sure.
Because that was an investment.
Yeah.
Right. You know, slaves were bought and sold. It was an investment. So, but the dream, the aspirational dream, that we'll all own a major corporation, it's in us all.
It seems like it.
Right. And that was the dream that's pushed the North and the South to Civil War. It wasn't just a case of human rights. So free labor was about if slavery continues to expand, and who knows, slavery could have gone into manufacturing because there were Baltimore area where slaves worked in plants. So we don't know. I mean, historians speculate about this all the time. Well, slavery would have naturally died out. Bullshit. I mean, because wherever cheap labor is that's where people's capital go, right? Okay, costs. How much does it cost me to make this? How much is going to, in the end, what's the net profit's going to be? And so we have to talk about those kinds of issues. One of the great things of capitalism is its creativity. Having traveled to the old communist world, realizing that, well, there's ways that collectivism can be stagnant too. So there's you got to have a balance here. We have to think about those balances and ask questions about them. But from Lincoln's team of rivals, their debates weren't that great, and I would disagree with Colonel Goodwin on that. What ultimately Lincoln has to do is take a side. And ultimately, when the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation on September 22nd, 1862 is written, he's trying to negotiate with the South to say, hey, come on, guys, it's a military order. And then the issuance of on January 1st, 1863 is the death knell. Okay, we have to destroy the institution of slavery. And that's how that deal goes. I mean, the team of rivals stuff, it's a good read.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this as a historian. It's a good read. I love, because she's a great writer. I love how it flows and everything. But I'd be like, Barack Obama, you better not believe that stuff.
Actually.
Ultimately, this is the terrible thing in anybody's leadership. You do have to take a side, and sometimes that side is going to be controversial. Hopefully, you don't have to take a side where you end up destroying people's lives. Look, Lincoln took a side. White settlers got all the lands by native people being pushed aside.
Yeah, I read or heard that the same day that the Emancipation Proclamation was delivered, there was something like the largest mass execution by hanging of natives.
Yeah.
It was like the next day or something.
Right. So
ridiculous.
People take sides all the time. The question is, do we have the ethical capability to think about those sides we take?
Yeah, and the ethical responsibility, yeah.
Yeah. And my job as a teacher is to help at least think about the choices we make. We are upcoming with choices all the time. Climate change is coming on us all the time.
Oh, man.
We've got to make some real ethical decisions, and we got to make some real tangible decisions. It's not just that manufacturing towns like Benton Harbor with lead poisoning and other stuff there. It's upper-class suburbs like Rockford who also have that's right. These issues that we have to deal with. These are the long-term issues of history of a certain kind of manufacturing. And now the rubber meets the road. And why aren't the people of Rockford associating with the people of Benton Harbor or Flint? Or that's, luckily in Grand Rapids, and we still have more to do. We started doing sewer separation early on in the 90s. People moaned and complained because the taxes went up. But it cleaned the water because the old water system, it was full of shit.
Yeah, right, yeah.
It was just, the river was full of shit. Now people can say, oh, we can get the rapids running back. We can do this and that. But without that
sewer separation.
That's right. Throughout the city, which was a major thing. And we had some people who had the courage enough to do that. The kind of incinerator was an attempt to think about the ecology of these things that we have in Grand Rapids and produce some energy. So those are issues that we have before us in the United States, and we should be dealing with it.
Yeah, it's they're complex problems. There's so many different facets to them.
And whose gourd's gonna get who gonna get ox? Who gonna get gored by the ox?
Yeah, right.
Like,
what hit?
And who's gonna lose money on the deal?
Yeah.
And sometimes, rightly so, to lose money on the deal because the
propped up artificially by polluting, perhaps.
Right. It's just like roads. I mean, roads. We often think about roads in a way that one, it tore up communities,
divided
cities,
them.
right? It split cities when we might have had alternatives, and those alternatives might have been talked about at the time, but powerful interests thought they would lose money. In the long run, they might lose lives. So that's why I'm saying long run thinking, and people have the capacity to think. Now you're going to make a choice, and just hopefully you're not on the side of it. And I say this is the great thing about studying African Americans, because we have been on the side of people making decisions on our backs.
Controlling the narrative.
And controlling the narrative, so it's important for me. That's why I wrote this book, full title, Letters to Martin, Meditations on Democracy in Black America, because there's an experience that comes out. One could do this with indigenous folks too. But I really wanted to just to help people think about, and I still have a faith in democracy because I don't see the alternative. You can see Chinese state capitalism, which that's what they run now.
Yeah.
But will you have a small group of people making decisions for your lives?
Probably.
Right? It may be more efficient, but is it wise? Can we express differences without hitting each other over the head with a bat? And
right.
So this is the whole point of democracy, is to be able to have differences. But entrenched interests are there. Like, if I'm the richest people in Grand Rapids, I got entrenched interests. If I ain't the richest person, I got another kind of entrenched. And so we got to come to the table and talk about whose interests are going to be represented.
Have you ever seen that done successfully?
No, but I keep hope.
Yeah, okay.
I keep hope alive. No, I mean, powerful interests often overrule people, but my job is to be a truth teller. And
unorganized people.
Yeah.
Powerful people run over.
And because I came from working class, working people, my first heart is always with them. I take a side.
Mm-hmm.
I take a side in their struggle. I'm always going to be interested in single mom without child care, affordable child care. That's always going to be my interest first, and it benefits all other things. It benefits the professional women if we have elder care and old, because we all gonna get old. But I take a side. My first interest is always my own folks who came to be poor, who are poor and struggling, and so forth.
I wonder if that's kind of part of it is that, just to kind of extrapolate from your story is that what you're talking about, pulling at your heartstrings, is kind of like what resonates with you.
And what I grew up with.
And what you grew up with. Mm-hmm. And it's that, that's the whole white privilege conversation where you have to, white privilege essentially should be identified and then kind of mitigated.
Yeah, I don't like that word privilege because, like I said, I'm in the MBA of academics.
Right.
And so that gives me a certain cachet privilege. So all of us have privilege. So we all examine. You and I are both men, males, at least self-identified males.
Yeah. Same here.
And so that also comes with a certain amount of privilege. So I think that we all ought to be thinking about. What we do with our status that is positive affect all of us around. And white privilege is that the structure is built for you, but there are so many, like I said, there's still people living in Mount County, and it ain't working for them.
Oh no,
But
not well.
They are defending it, and they are defending it because it's not working for them, and I get that.
Have you seen?
They're taking a side.
Yeah, they're taking a side. Have you got any tips on organizing?
Well, organizing is
seen it done?
Going to people and talking to them about their issues and not yours.
There it is.
It's about their issue, and then where our issues meet.
Mm-hmm.
So if we both worried about the plumbing of the city, our issues meet.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is, who's going to benefit? So it's like mass incarceration was about war on drugs. And the war on drugs happened not just in the United States, happened in Mexico and through Central America. That's why all these people are fleeing up here. Because the war on drugs destroyed, just like it destroyed poor inner city neighborhoods, it was destroying communities throughout Honduras and Guatemala, El Salvador, just in the same way. So the real question, is, what do we have in common? What can we talk about together? It may take us a little while to come together because, again, the area of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to just keep working at it and find issues that, okay, what's your benefits? My white progressive friends, and I do have some white progressive friends.
I'm sure you do.
But they often are talking at people.
Yeah.
And they don't really want to know what other people are thinking.
Right.
They're talking at people and what their needs are because they think they know the needs. And this is why they are defeated all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need to go and say, well, what if the person in the worst housing project wants to figure out how to get equity in the society like everybody else? And you're like, well, we're talking about affordable housing. And they really say, well, I really want to buy a house. And how can I do that? So the equity issues, instead of listening, you're talking at people. And that's what many people mean by white privilege. Upper class people talking at, or upper class people knowing what it means to be poor. They have no idea what it means to be poor.
Yeah.
Right? I once heard a political leader in prominent rich family saying workers make too much money. Well, who the hell are you to say that?
That's a bold statement.
Right, because in actuality, you don't know what the cost of that those people have to deal with. I once had a state rep in Grand Rapids who wanted to cut welfare benefits, and he never once talked to any women on welfare. And I gathered about 300 women at a place to confront him, and they were talking about child care. It's cheaper for me to stay till my kids get of age for child care reasons, elder care reasons. He was a white man talking to black women, mostly black women, in a way that was totally disrespectful and totally didn't get what their issues were.
Mansplaining them, just
mansplaining to death. And,
Let me tell you about your problem.
Your problem is you're lazy.
Yeah,
No, people
that's
weren't
not
lazy.
it.
They had other issues that conflicted. So stop telling people what they ought to think,
Mm-hmm.
and tell them and listen and say where we can come together. I'm sure corporate people ain't coming together on a labor union. That's my issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you to organize a labor issue because power has to speak back to power. That's democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And no, you may not like it, and I may not like how you. I'm not going to hit you in the head, but I'm going to organize enough power to start turning the tide of politics and other stuff. That's the idea of whole nonviolent movement was to get people to the table with the least amount of destruction. Right? We don't want to see Ukraine.
Mm-mm.
Right? We don't want to have change come through bombing and scorched earth policy. We want to see, yeah, we're gonna argue, we're gonna put force against you, and you're gonna put force against us, but not by mass destruction.
Right.
And that's really, really the at stake. And that's what democracy is supposed to do. You know, that's why there was supposed to be separations of power.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so. Like I said, I respect some of the ideas of the framers of the Constitution because they were wise.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom is long-term wisdom in that. They had seen the European wars of religion. They had seen the abuses of the monarchy, or monarchy just taking everything for its treasury as opposed to their own. I get that, but I want people to know that they have to be confronted as well. My grandmother used to say, "God don't like ugly. He ain't too particular about pretty." and so I mean, there's a rough equality there, right? That,
Yeah.
We put on our underwear the same way, one leg at a time, and maybe some people jump in them. I don't know.
Yeah.
But these are the fundamentals of democracy, and those come out of community. And this is what I really wanted to write about and to think about, and to get people to think about. And my choice of titling that book, "Letters to Martin: Meditation on Democracy in Black America," means I've taken a side. I've taken a side that that I'm going to stand with working folks, working class folks. Like I said, I'm not denying my own privilege, because I am. I get to travel and I get to do things most ordinary people never get a chance to do.
Right.
And I'm not going to claim victim. And I've been fortunate enough. The roads that have opened up to me, the alleys, the lanes, opened up to me. I've taken advantage of where I could. Not everything has, like for everybody, gone the way you hoped. But I'm not gonna sit here and say, "Oh, I don't have any privilege." That would be far from the truth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but using it responsibly for a population that resonates with you,
Yeah.
that definitely could use the help.
Well,
I
and
think.
I used to, when I taught at Calvin College, I used to tell all the minority students, you got to walk across this campus like you own it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let everybody define like you don't own this campus. You're a student just like they are here. And this is the attitude I tried to have when I was in college. Look, people
Just
say,
as much my school.
people would say, "Oh, you're here on affirmative action." I would say, "Well, you're here because your daddy gave money. So what's the difference?"
Yeah, what's the difference?
Right?
Yeah.
You're no smarter than me because I saw your grades and I got better grades than you do.
Yeah.
So okay, so what's up with that? But you have to have a sense of confidence that you own the place, and my ancestors have been in the United States longer than most people's ancestors have in the United States. So I figured, I own the place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna walk across the campus like I own the place. It disturbs people. I know when I worked at Calvin, it served a lot of people, but that's, I own the place, and in Kansas, I own the place, right? And so that's a difference. But it really is a powerful element that we have to think about how we, in an age of nuclear armament, we have to come to the table without killing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the possibilities are real. That we might just do it. And that's the thing, That's why I wrote the book.
Yeah. To
get us to think.
Yeah.
I hope it's a think piece.
Well, I do too. It provoked some thoughts for me.
Yeah.
I particularly like that labor chapter a lot.
Well,
it seems like a good note to end on.
Yeah. Well, thank you for interviewing me.
Yeah, thank you for joining and allowing me to. This has been fantastic. All right, everybody. See you next time.